The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass that overlooked the glittering expanse of Manhattan. Alexander Sterling stood motionless before those windows, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. A man worth billions who felt like he owned nothing that mattered. At 34, Alexander had built an empire from his late father's struggling tech company, transforming Sterling Innovations into a global powerhouse that revolutionized sustainable energy. Forbes called him a visionary. The Wall Street Journal praised his business acumen. But tonight, as he stared at his own hollow eyes in the window's reflection, all he saw was the shell of a man who had forgotten how to feel anything beyond the sharp edge of ambition and the dull ache of loneliness. His phone buzzed for the 14th time in an hour. He didn't need to look to know it was his publicist, Margaret Chen, probably forwarding another article, another blog post, another social media scandal that threatened to unravel everything he'd built. The latest incident had been particularly damaging. Photographs of him leaving a high-end club at 3 in the morning, looking disheveled and distant, accompanied by a model whose name he couldn't remember and whose company he hadn't particularly enjoyed. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst had been the interview his ex-girlfriend Vanessa had given to a major magazine, painting him as emotionally unavailable, cold, and incapable of genuine human connection. She'd called him a man who had traded his heart for a stock portfolio. The article had gone viral, spawning countless think pieces about billionaires and their inability to maintain meaningful relationships. The board was panicking. 3 major investors had called emergency meetings. His company's image, so carefully cultivated around innovation and positive social impact, was crumbling under the weight of his personal reputation. Alexander Sterling, the man who promised to save the planet, couldn't even save himself from tabloid destruction. "You need to fix this," Margaret had told him that morning, her usually composed demeanor cracking with frustration. "Your personal life is bleeding into the business. The board is talking about replacing you as CEO. They want someone stable, someone who represents the values Sterling Innovations claims to champion." Alexander had listened in silence, feeling nothing except a vague sense of inevitability. Of course it would come to this. Everything he touched eventually turned cold, didn't it? "I have an idea," Margaret had continued, leaning forward with an intensity that finally caught his attention. "It's unconventional, but it might be exactly what we need. A contract marriage." The words had hung in the air between them like something absurd and impossible. Yet here he was, hours later, considering it seriously. The plan was simple in its cynicism. Find a woman willing to marry him for a specified period, a year, perhaps 2, in exchange for financial compensation. She would play the role of devoted wife, help rehabilitate his image, appear at charity events and board meetings, convince the world that Alexander Sterling was capable of commitment and genuine emotion. It was fake. It was manipulative. It was, quite possibly, his only option. A knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice rough from disuse. Margaret entered, followed by a woman who immediately captured Alexander's attention in a way that surprised him. She wasn't what he'd expected, not the polished, model-perfect type that usually populated his world. Instead, she was something altogether more interesting. She stood perhaps 5'6", with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that revealed a face more striking than traditionally beautiful. Her eyes were the color of aged whiskey, sharp and assessing as they met his gaze without flinching. She wore a simple navy blue dress that looked professional but inexpensive, and she carried herself with a straight-backed determination that spoke of someone who had fought for everything she'd ever earned. "Alexander Sterling, this is Emma Hartley," Margaret made the introduction with barely concealed satisfaction. "Ms. Hartley is a social worker who recently lost her job due to budget cuts. She has her master's degree in social work from Columbia, has worked extensively with at-risk youth, and is currently struggling to keep the community center she founded from closing due to lack of funding." Alexander extended his hand, noting how Emma's grip was firm, almost challenging. "Ms. Hartley." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested she'd spent years advocating loudly for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. "Please sit." Alexander gestured to the chairs arranged before his desk, studying this woman who might become his temporary wife. Margaret has explained the arrangement? Emma settled into the chair with careful precision, her hands folded in her lap. She has. You need a wife to improve your public image and save your company's reputation. I need money to keep my community center open and to pay for my sister's medical treatments. It's a business transaction, nothing more. There was something almost aggressive in her directness, as if she were daring him to judge her for considering such an arrangement. Alexander found himself appreciating it. At least she wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. And you're comfortable with the deception? He asked, genuinely curious. She didn't strike him as someone who would typically engage in such elaborate pretense. A muscle tightened in Emma's jaw. I'm comfortable doing whatever it takes to save the things and people I care about. My community center serves 200 kids from troubled backgrounds. My sister Lily has juvenile diabetes and needs better insurance coverage than I can currently provide. So yes, Mr. Sterling, I'm comfortable with whatever needs to be done. There was pain beneath her words, carefully controlled but undeniably present. Alexander recognized it because he saw something similar in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone carrying too much weight, someone who had learned to function despite the crushing pressure of responsibility and loss. The contract would be for 18 months, Margaret interjected, sliding a thick document across the desk toward Emma. You would live in Mr. Sterling's penthouse, appear at all necessary social and business functions, and maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage. In return, you'll receive $5 million, half up front, half upon successful completion of the contract. Additionally, Mr. Sterling will ensure your community center receives sustainable funding for the next 5 years, and your sister will receive the best medical care available. Emma's eyes widened slightly at the numbers, but she maintained her composure. What about after the 18 months? We'll stage an amicable separation, Margaret explained. No fault on either side. You'll walk away with your money and continue your work. Mr. Sterling's reputation will be restored, and both of you can move forward with your lives. Alexander watched Emma's face as she processed the information. He saw the war playing out behind her eyes, the part of her that found this entire arrangement distasteful battling against the desperate part that needed what he was offering. He knew which side would win before she did. I'll need the contract reviewed by a lawyer, Emma said finally. Of course, Margaret agreed. We'll arrange that. But Ms. Hartley, I need to stress the importance of discretion. If word gets out that this marriage is anything other than genuine, the entire arrangement falls apart. For both of you. Emma stood, smoothing her dress with hands that only slightly trembled. I understand. When do you need my answer? We'll need to move quickly, Alexander said, speaking directly to her for the first time since the negotiation had begun. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. I'd like to announce our engagement by then. Something flickered across Emma's face. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe the full weight of what she was agreeing to finally settling on her shoulders. That's very fast. I know. Alexander stood as well, finding himself oddly drawn to this woman's combination of vulnerability and strength. But necessary. The question is, Ms. Hartley, are you willing to do what's necessary? Their eyes met across his vast desk, two strangers about to embark on one of the most intimate deceptions possible. Emma's chin lifted, that determination he'd noticed earlier hardening into something like resolve. I'll have my answer by tomorrow morning, she said. As Margaret escorted Emma out, Alexander returned to his position by the windows. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the city lights below seemed to pulse with renewed clarity. He felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a stirring of interest, perhaps even curiosity. Emma Hartley wasn't what he'd expected, and that small deviation from his anticipated script felt almost like hope. He didn't believe in love, hadn't for years. His parents' marriage had been a battlefield disguised as a partnership, ending only with his mother's departure when he was 16 and his father's slow descent into bitterness. Alexander had learned early that emotion was a liability, that opening your heart only gave others the power to destroy you. But there was something about Emma, the fire in her eyes, the barely concealed pain, the way she looked at him like he was just another obstacle to overcome rather than some untouchable billionaire, that made him wonder if 18 months with her might be more complicated than he'd anticipated. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. Another article, this one questioning his fitness to lead Sterling Innovations. The board member quoted was calling for his resignation. Alexander's jaw tightened. He'd built this company from near bankruptcy to a $50 billion empire. He'd revolutionized sustainable energy, created thousands of jobs, pushed technology forward in ways that would benefit millions. And now they wanted to take it away because he'd had the audacity to be lonely in public. He needed Emma Hartley to say yes. More than that, he needed her to be convincing. The world needed to believe that Alexander Sterling had found something worth more than his billions, someone who could crack the ice around his heart and reveal the man beneath the reputation. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was going to fake the one thing he'd never been able to achieve genuinely. A real connection, a meaningful relationship, the kind of love that actually changed people. But as he stood there, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked windows, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that Emma Hartley might be more dangerous than any business rival he'd ever faced. Because unlike his competitors, she wasn't interested in his money or power. She was interested in survival, in protecting the people she loved, and there was something absolutely terrifying about someone with nothing to lose except everything that mattered. Emma sat in the cramped waiting room of the free legal clinic in Brooklyn, the contract Margaret Chen had provided weighing heavy in her canvas bag. Around her, other people waited for their own consultations, immigration issues, landlord disputes, custody battles. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that somehow felt appropriate for the decision she was about to make. Emma Hartley? A young lawyer, probably fresh from law school, called her name from the doorway. She followed him into a tiny office crammed with case files and a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a thrift store. His nameplate read, James Rodriguez, J.D. So knew the ink was probably still wet on his degree. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Emma said, pulling the contract from her bag. James took it, his eyebrows rising as he saw the letterhead, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms. Sterling Innovations? The tech company? It's complicated, Emma said, and that might have been the understatement of her life. As James read through the document, Emma's phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Lily. "Having a bad day. Blood sugar won't stabilize. Might need to go to the ER but can't afford the copay. Don't worry, though. I'll figure it out." Emma's chest tightened. Don't worry. As if she could ever do anything else when it came to Lily. Their parents had died in a car accident 8 years ago, when Emma was 21 and Lily was just 13. Emma had dropped out of her senior year at Columbia, fought for custody, worked 3 jobs while finishing her degree at night, and dedicated every waking moment to making sure Lily had the stability and care their parents would have wanted her to have. Juvenile diabetes had been diagnosed 3 years ago. The medical bills had been mounting ever since, even with the basic insurance Emma's job at the youth center had provided. Now, without that job, without that insurance, they were drowning. James looked up from the contract, his expression somewhere between impressed and concerned. "This is a very generous offer. $5 million, medical coverage, funding for your community center. But Ms. Hartley, you understand what you're agreeing to, right? This is essentially an 18-month performance. You'll have to live with this man, pretend to be in love with him, deceive everyone around you." "I know what I'm agreeing to," Emma said quietly. "Do you?" James leaned forward, his young face earnest. "Because I have to tell you, legally, this contract is airtight. If you breach it, if anyone discovers the truth about this arrangement, you forfeit everything. The money, the medical coverage, the funding, all of it. And beyond that, you could face legal consequences for fraud." Emma had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real, more dangerous. "What about him? What happens if he breaches the contract? Same penalties, plus he has to pay you an additional $2 million. James tapped the relevant section. "But Emma, his lawyers are better than anyone you or I could afford. If this goes wrong, you're the one who's going to suffer most." She knew he was right. Alexander Sterling had resources beyond her imagination. If this arrangement fell apart, he would land on his feet while she crashed and burned. But what choice did she have? "Is there anything in the contract that concerns you legally?" Emma asked. "Anything that's unfair or potentially harmful?" James spent another 20 minutes reviewing the details, occasionally making notes. Finally, he looked up. It's actually surprisingly fair given the circumstances. You have protections built in. Your own bedroom, reasonable privacy, the right to decline anything that makes you uncomfortable. The financial terms are clear and equitable. Honestly, from a purely legal standpoint, this is better than most prenuptial agreements I've seen. But? Emma prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. But Ms. Hartley, this isn't just a legal question. This is your life. 18 months is a long time to live a lie. And Alexander Sterling... James paused, choosing his words carefully. Everything I've read about him suggests he's a difficult man, cold, emotionally distant. Are you prepared for what it might be like to share your life with someone like that? Emma thought about the man she'd met last night. James was right. There had been a coldness to Alexander Sterling, an almost tangible wall around him. But there had been something else too, something she'd seen in the split second when their eyes met. A loneliness that mirrored her own, a pain he thought he'd hidden but that she recognized because she carried something similar. I can handle difficult, Emma said. I've been handling difficult my entire adult life. After leaving the clinic, Emma took the subway to the community center in the Bronx, her community center, though it wouldn't be for much longer if she couldn't find funding. The Jefferson Street Youth Center occupied a renovated warehouse in a neighborhood that most people wrote off as dangerous, forgotten, not worth saving. But Emma had grown up 3 blocks from here, had been one of those kids people wrote off, and she knew better. Inside, the usual chaos greeted her. Kids ranging from 8 to 18 filled the space, some doing homework in the tutoring corner, others shooting basketballs in the gym. A group of teenage girls practicing a dance routine on the small stage Emma had convinced a local contractor to build at cost. The air smelled like the pizza they served for afternoon snack, and the industrial cleaner they used to keep the old building from completely falling apart. Emma! A small blur of energy crashed into her legs. 7-year-old Marcus Washington, all gap-toothed smile and untamable enthusiasm, looked up at her with complete trust. Are you staying? Can you help me with my math homework? Mrs. Patterson says I need to understand fractions, but they don't make any sense. Emma's heart clenched. This was why she was considering Alexander Sterling's offer. For Marcus and the 199 other kids like him who needed this place, who needed to know that someone cared, that they weren't forgotten. Let me see what you're working on, she said, letting Marcus drag her to the homework table. As she helped him understand how to divide fractions, Emma felt someone watching her. She looked up to find Thomas Green, the center's volunteer coordinator and her best friend since college, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and a knowing look on his face. After Marcus ran off to join the basketball game, Thomas slid into the seat beside her. You've got that look. What look? Emma asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. The look that says you're about to do something either brilliant or completely insane, and you haven't quite figured out which. Thomas had known her too long, seen her through too much. He was the only person besides Lily who could read her this accurately. What's going on, Em? She couldn't tell him. The contract was explicitly clear about confidentiality. But Thomas wasn't stupid, and he knew she'd been desperately searching for funding solutions. I might have found a way to save the center, she said carefully, and to get Lily better medical coverage. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Why do I feel like there's a massive but coming? Because you know me too well. Emma glanced around to make sure no kids were in earshot. It's complicated and I can't explain everything, but if I do this, I'll need you to run the center for a while. Maybe 18 months. 18 months? Emma, what are you... Understanding dawned on Thomas's face, quickly followed by concern. No, whatever you're thinking, no. You don't even know what I'm thinking. I know you well enough to know when you're about to sacrifice yourself for other people. Thomas grabbed her hand across the table. What are you doing, Emma? She wanted to tell him everything, about Alexander Sterling, about the contract, about the impossible choice between her integrity and her responsibility to the people she loved. But she couldn't, not without risking everything. I'm doing what needs to be done, she said quietly. The center means everything to me, Thomas. These kids mean everything to me. And Lily, I can't watch my sister suffer because I can't afford to get her proper treatment. If there's a way to fix this, I have to take it, even if it costs you, especially if it costs me. Emma squeezed his hand. Promise me you'll take care of this place while I'm working on securing funding. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew her well enough to recognize when her mind was made up. You're going to tell me eventually what this is really about, right? Eventually, Emma agreed, hoping it was a promise she could keep. That evening, Emma sat at Lily's bedside in their small 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Lily was pale, exhausted from another day of fighting her own body's inability to regulate blood sugar. At 21, she should have been finishing college, going to parties, figuring out who she wanted to be. Instead, she spent half her life in doctors' offices and the other half pretending she was fine when she clearly wasn't. You look serious, Lily said, her voice thin. What's wrong? Emma almost laughed. Here was her sister, struggling to stay conscious, asking what was wrong with Emma's life. I'm always serious. Yeah, but this is your extra serious face. Your I'm about to make a big decision face. Lily shifted in bed, trying to sit up straighter. What's going on? I got a job offer, Emma said, which was technically true even if it left out approximately 90% of the relevant details. It pays really well. Well enough to solve a lot of our problems. Lily's eyes brightened for the first time in days. Emma, that's amazing. What kind of job? It's complicated. I'd be working for a private client, helping with some public relations issues. It would mean I'd be away from the apartment a lot, maybe living on site sometimes. But the pay would cover your medical bills, keep the community center open. All of it. Then why do you look like someone kicked your puppy? Lily asked, too perceptive by half. Because I'm about to lie to you for the next 18 months, Emma thought. Because I'm about to enter into a fake marriage with a man I don't know, pretend to be in love for the cameras, and deceive everyone who matters to me. Just nervous about starting something new, Emma said instead. It's a big change. Lily reached out and took Emma's hand. You've been taking care of me for 8 years, Em. You put your whole life on hold to make sure I had everything I needed. Maybe it's time you did something for yourself. If only Lily knew how far from for herself this decision actually was. But Emma smiled and squeezed her sister's hand. Maybe you're right. That night, alone in her room, Emma pulled out the contract one more time. She read through every clause, every stipulation, every promise and penalty. She thought about the community center, about the kids who depended on it. She thought about Lily, about the medical care she desperately needed. She thought about her own exhaustion, the years of struggling to keep everything together with sheer determination, and very little else. And she thought about Alexander Sterling, standing in his penthouse office like a king surveying a kingdom that no longer brought him joy. She thought about the emptiness she'd seen in his eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Could she do this? Could she really move into his home? Pretend to be his wife? Convince the world they were in love when they were really just two people making a calculated business arrangement? Emma pulled out her phone and typed a message to Margaret Chen. I'm in. When do we start? She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then lay back on her bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling of her tiny room. In 18 months, if everything went according to plan, she would have $5 million, Lily would be healthy, and the community center would be secure. She could go back to her life, and Alexander Sterling could go back to his. It was only 18 months. How hard could it be to pretend to love someone for 18 months? As she drifted towards sleep, Emma's last conscious thought was a question that would haunt her for months to come. What if pretending wasn't the hard part? What if the hard part was remembering it was all pretend? The engagement announcement was scheduled for Friday evening at the Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala, an event that attracted Manhattan's elite, major donors, and enough media coverage to ensure their story would dominate the news cycle. Emma had exactly 5 days to transform from a community center director to a billionaire's fiancée. Margaret Chen orchestrated the transformation with military precision. On Tuesday morning, Emma found herself in a Soho boutique that didn't even have prices on the clothing, surrounded by stylists who looked at her like she was a particularly challenging renovation project. We need to elevate her look without losing authenticity, Margaret instructed the head stylist, a whip-thin woman named Simone who had apparently dressed 3 first ladies and countless celebrities. Emma is a social worker, a woman of substance. We want her to look like she belongs in Alexander's world, but not like she's abandoned her own values. Emma stood on a platform while Simone circled her, making occasional sounds that could have meant anything from approval to despair. Good bone structure. Excellent posture. The hair needs work. We'll soften it, add some dimension. Clothing should be elegant but not ostentatious. Classic pieces with modern touches. For the next 6 hours, Emma was measured, photographed, draped in fabrics, and subjected to opinions about everything from her eyebrow shape to her shoe size. She tried on approximately 50 dresses before they found one for the engagement announcement, a stunning midnight blue gown that somehow made her look both sophisticated and approachable, expensive but not unapproachable. "This is who you are now," Simone said, adjusting the dress's neckline. "A woman who can move between worlds. Remember that." On Wednesday, Emma met with a media consultant named Richard Blackwood, who had apparently prepped everyone from tech CEOs to Hollywood stars for major interviews. "The story needs to be consistent and believable," Richard explained, setting a tape recorder on the table between them. "How did you and Alexander meet?" Emma glanced at Margaret, who nodded. They'd crafted the story together the previous day. 6 months ago, at a fundraiser for youth education, Alexander was the keynote speaker. I challenged him during the Q&A about whether tech companies were doing enough to address digital divide in underserved communities. "And he was intrigued by your passion," Richard continued, clearly familiar with the narrative. "He asked you to coffee to continue the conversation. You initially refused, thinking he was just another billionaire looking for good PR, but he was persistent. He wanted to understand the real challenges facing communities like the ones I serve," Emma recited, feeling strange about putting words to this fiction. "He started visiting the community center, seeing firsthand what we did. We talked for hours about how to use technology for social good. Somewhere along the way, talking about work turned into talking about everything else. It was a good story, believable, consistent with both their public personas, easy to remember. The problem was that none of it was true. Richard drilled her for 3 hours on potential interview questions, teaching her how to deflect anything too personal, how to redirect conversation back to approved talking points, how to appear genuine while revealing almost nothing real. "The key is specificity," Richard explained. "Vague answers make people suspicious. If someone asks what you love about Alexander, don't say he's kind. Say he has this way of listening, really listening. That makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. Give them details that feel intimate without actually revealing anything important. That seems dishonest," Emma said before she could stop herself. Margaret and Richard exchanged a look. "Miss Hartley," Margaret said carefully, "if you're having second thoughts—" "I'm not," Emma cut her off. "I'm just adjusting to all of this." On Thursday, Emma was scheduled to move into Alexander's penthouse, a necessity to maintain the illusion that they'd been secretly dating for months. She packed her meager belongings into 2 suitcases, said an emotional goodbye to Lily, who was thrilled about Emma's new job and the promised better medical coverage, and took an Uber to the address Margaret had provided. Alexander's building was in Tribeca, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated luxury that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The doorman greeted her by name, clearly forewarned, and escorted her to a private elevator that required a key card to access the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into Alexander's apartment, and Emma had to consciously keep her jaw from dropping. The space was enormous, probably 4,000 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Hudson River and the Manhattan skyline. The decor was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and neutral colors, more like a museum than a home. "Miss Hartley." Alexander emerged from what appeared to be a home office, dressed in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent had been. Without his suit, he looked younger, almost approachable, though the guardedness in his eyes remained. "Welcome." "This is—" Emma searched for words that weren't obscenely expensive or terrifyingly impersonal. "Impressive?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across Alexander's face. That's one word for it. Let me show you your room. He led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that Emma suspected was original and priceless, stopping at a door near the end. The bedroom beyond was larger than Emma's entire previous apartment, with its own bathroom done in marble and fixtures that looked like liquid gold. You'll have complete privacy, Alexander said, standing in the doorway as Emma set down her suitcases. There's a lock on the door if you want it. Your bathroom is fully stocked, but if you need anything else, just let me know. Where's your room? Emma asked, then immediately felt her face heat. Not that it matters, I just meant down the hall. Alexander pointed back the way they'd come. The master suite is on the other side of the living area. We'll have plenty of space to avoid each other when necessary. There was something almost sad in how he said it, like he expected avoidance to be the default state of their arrangement. Maybe for him it was. Maybe Alexander Sterling had spent so long keeping people at a distance that he'd forgotten how to do anything else. About tomorrow night, Emma said, changing the subject before the silence could become uncomfortable. The gala. What do I need to know? Alexander leaned against the doorframe, studying her with an intensity that made Emma feel simultaneously seen and analyzed. There will be approximately 400 guests, most of them donors to the Sterling Foundation. The media will be present for the first hour. We'll make our entrance together, and during the cocktail hour, I'll propose. It's all choreographed. Romantic, Emma said dryly. This isn't about romance, Ms. Hartley. This is about convincing people that I'm capable of commitment and genuine emotion. Can you do that? The challenge in his voice sparked something defiant in Emma. Can you? Alexander's eyes widened slightly. Clearly, he wasn't used to being questioned. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his face from coldly handsome to something warmer, more human. Fair question, he admitted. I'll do my best to appear convincingly besotted. You might have to help me with that. I'm told I'm not particularly good at displaying emotion. I noticed, Emma said, then winced. Sorry, that was honest. Alexander pushed off from the doorframe. I'd prefer honesty between us, Miss Hartley, even if we're lying to everyone else. This arrangement works better if we're at least truthful with each other. Then call me Emma. If we're going to be married, you should probably use my first name. Emma, Alexander repeated, and something about the way he said it, careful and deliberate, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. And you should call me Alexander. Or Alex if you prefer, though almost no one does. Why not? Emma found herself curious about this strange, remote man who was about to become her husband in every legal sense, if not emotional one. Alexander hesitated, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his face before his walls came back up. My mother called me Alex. After she left, I preferred Alexander. The admission surprised Emma with its intimacy. She wanted to ask more. Why his mother had left, how old he'd been, whether he ever saw her. But the shuttered look on Alexander's face told her she'd already pushed as far as he was willing to go. Alexander it is then, she said softly. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Emma, tomorrow night will be difficult. Everyone will be watching us, judging, looking for cracks in the story. Are you ready for that? Emma thought about Lily, about the community center, about all the kids who depended on her. I'm ready. That night, alone in her new bedroom that was bigger and more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever lived, Emma lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Alexander's penthouse. Somewhere down the hall she heard movement. Alexander, probably also unable to sleep. She wondered what kept him awake at night, what demons haunted a man who had everything money could buy, but seemed to lack everything that actually mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. You disappeared. Are you okay? Emma typed back, I'm fine. Starting the new job. Can't really talk about it yet, but I promise I'm okay. You'd tell me if you weren't, right? Would she? Emma wasn't sure anymore. The lies were already piling up, and she'd only been in this arrangement for a few days. How many more lies would she have to tell before this was over? And more importantly, how many of those lies would she tell so convincingly that she'd start believing them herself? The Sterling Foundation Gala was held at the Plaza Hotel in a ballroom that looked like something out of a fairy tale, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Emma stood in front of the full-length mirror in Alexander's penthouse, barely recognizing herself in the midnight blue gown, with her hair styled in soft waves and makeup applied by a professional who'd made her look simultaneously natural and impossibly polished. "You look beautiful," Alexander said from the doorway, and Emma startled. She hadn't heard him approach. He was devastating in a custom tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the billionaire bachelor who'd dominated gossip columns for years. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Emma managed, trying to calm her racing heart. It was just nerves, she told herself. Just the anxiety of knowing they were about to lie to 400 people in countless media outlets. Alexander crossed to her, reaching into his pocket. "Before we go, there's one more thing." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a ring that made Emma's breath catch. The center stone was an emerald, unusual for an engagement ring, surrounded by diamonds, set in what looked like platinum. It was stunning and surprisingly personal, not the massive, showy diamond she would have expected. "It was my grandmother's," Alexander said quietly. "My father's mother. She was one of the few people who understood me. I thought it would make the engagement seem more genuine, using a family ring." Emma stared at the ring, understanding the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just a prop. It was a piece of his history, his family, the rare personal detail in an otherwise calculated arrangement. "Alexander, I can't—" "Yes, you can." He lifted the ring from its box. "May I?" Emma held out her left hand, trying to steady its trembling. Alexander's fingers were warm as they grasped hers, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Emma wondered if Margaret had somehow obtained her ring size or if this was just extraordinary luck. "Perfect," Alexander said softly, still holding her hand. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Emma forgot this was all pretend. There was something in his gaze, a loneliness that matched her own, a desperate hope that maybe this crazy plan would actually work. Then the moment passed. Alexander released her hand and stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. "We should go. The car is waiting." The ride to the plaza was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma kept touching the ring on her finger, feeling its weight, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. "Remember the story," Alexander said as they pulled up to the hotel. "We met 6 months ago. We've been keeping the relationship private because we both valued our privacy. Tonight, I'm telling you in front of everyone how I feel because I can't keep it secret anymore." "That's actually quite romantic," Emma said. "For a lie." "The best lies usually are." Alexander's mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ready?" Emma took a deep breath. "Ready." The moment they stepped out of the car, cameras flashed. Photographers shouted questions. Reporters thrust microphones forward. And Emma felt Alexander's hand settle at the small of her back, a possessive, protective gesture that she told herself was just part of the performance. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you're in a relationship? Alexander, who's your date tonight? Miss Hartley, how long have you been seeing Mr. Sterling?" Alexander ignored them all, guiding Emma through the chaos with practiced ease. Once inside the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. Here, the elite of Manhattan society mingled with champagne and calculated smiles. Emma felt hundreds of eyes turned toward them, assessing, judging, trying to figure out who she was and whether she belonged in Alexander Sterling's world. "Alexander!" A woman in a dress that probably cost more than a car separated from a group and approached them. She was beautiful in that polished, artificial way. Platinum blonde hair, perfectly sculpted features, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you were bringing someone tonight." "You must be Emma." "Vanessa," Alexander said coolly. "Emma, this is Vanessa Hartwick. We used to date, of course." This was the woman who'd given that damning interview about Alexander's emotional unavailability. Emma extended her hand, noting how Vanessa's eyes immediately went to the engagement ring. "Used to date?" Vanessa's smile became sharper. "That's an interesting way to describe 3 years together, Alexander." 3 years that ended 6 months ago," Alexander replied, his hand tightening slightly on Emma's back. "I'm glad you could make it tonight, Vanessa. If you'll excuse us—" "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world," Vanessa interrupted, her eyes locked on Emma. Tell me, Emma, how did you meet Alexander? Through work? It was a test. Emma could feel it, could see the calculation in Vanessa's eyes as she waited to see if Emma would stumble, if she'd reveal some inconsistency in their story. This was what the next 18 months would be like. Constant vigilance, always performing, never able to drop the mask. At a fundraiser, Emma said smoothly, channeling all the media training Richard had drilled into her. I challenged him during a Q&A and he was intrigued. Or maybe annoyed. It was hard to tell at first. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. How interesting. Alexander usually doesn't like being challenged. Then maybe you didn't challenge him enough, Emma said, then immediately regretted it. That was too sharp, too defensive. She was supposed to be the gracious new girlfriend, not a jealous rival. But Alexander laughed, actually laughed, and Emma felt him relax slightly beside her. She's right. Emma has never been afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. It's refreshing. Vanessa looked between them, something unreadable flickering across her face. How lovely. Well, enjoy your evening. She drifted away, but Emma could feel her watching them from across the room. I'm sorry, Emma said quietly. That was perfect, Alexander interrupted. You defended me without being aggressive. You set boundaries. That's exactly what people need to see, someone who cares about me enough to stand up for me. Margaret appeared at Emma's elbow. It's time. Everyone's gathering in the main ballroom. The photographer is in position, and I've arranged for the quartet to play something appropriately romantic. Are you both ready? No, Emma thought, but she nodded anyway. The proposal was choreographed with the precision of a Broadway production. Alexander led Emma to the center of the ballroom, where a spontaneous spotlight happened to find them. The quartet began playing what Emma recognized as Can't Help Falling in Love, because apparently the universe had a sense of irony. Alexander took both her hands, and Emma was struck again by how warm they were, how solid. His eyes locked on hers, and for the audience around them, he began to speak. 6 months ago, I went to a fundraiser expecting another boring evening of speeches and small talk, Alexander said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. Instead, I met someone who challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. Emma Hartley stood up during the Q&A and asked me the one question no one else had dared to ask. Was I really making a difference? Or was I just another billionaire buying good press? There were nervous laughs from the audience. Emma felt her heart pounding, knowing what was coming. I should have been offended, Alexander continued. Instead, I was fascinated. Here was someone who didn't care about my money or my status. She cared about making real change, helping real people. I asked her to coffee and she said no. I asked again and she said no again. Finally, I showed up at her community center and asked if I could volunteer. This part of the story was fiction, but Alexander told it so convincingly that Emma almost believed it herself. His thumbs traced small circles on the backs of her hands, and she realized this gentle touch wasn't part of the choreography. It was Alexander, nervous, seeking connection. Over the past 6 months, Emma has taught me what it means to love something bigger than yourself, Alexander said. And now his voice had dropped, become more intimate. She's shown me that success isn't measured in stock prices or quarterly earnings. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you help, the difference you make. She's made me want to be better, not for my company or my reputation, but for her. Because she deserves someone who can match her passion, her dedication, her enormous heart. Emma's eyes stung with tears that were only partially fake. This might be a performance, but there was something in Alexander's voice, something genuine beneath the rehearsed words that touched her. Alexander released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, then stopped, a small smile playing at his lips. I had this whole thing planned with the ring, but I realize I already put it on your finger upstairs because I was too impatient to wait. So instead, he dropped to one knee and the ballroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Emma Hartley, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you? The rest of my life. They'd agreed on 18 months, but he was selling forever. And God help her, Emma almost believed him. His eyes held hers, and she saw something there. A plea, maybe, or a desperate hope that this could be real, that someone could actually love him the way he was pretending to love her. "Yes," Emma whispered, then louder. "Yes." Alexander stood, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was supposed to be for show, just a brief, chaste kiss to seal the engagement. But the moment their lips met, something shifted. Alexander kissed her like a drowning man finding air, like someone starved finally finding sustenance. His hands slid into her hair, and Emma found herself kissing him back with equal desperation. Forgetting the audience, forgetting the cameras, forgetting everything except the way her entire body seemed to light up at his touch. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Emma barely heard it. All she could focus on was the shock in Alexander's eyes, the way he looked at her like she'd just upended his entire world with a single kiss. "That was—" Alexander started, then seemed unable to finish. "Yeah," Emma agreed, because she didn't have words for it either. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, photographs, and questions. Everyone wanted to know about their relationship, their wedding plans, how Alexander had hidden this from the press for 6 months. Emma and Alexander told their story over and over, each repetition making it feel more real and less like the fiction it actually was. Vanessa cornered Emma near midnight when Alexander had been pulled away by a board member. "You should know something about Alexander," she said, her voice low and urgent. "He's very good at this, at the romance, the grand gestures, the words that make you feel special. But it's not real, Emma. Once he has what he wants, once the novelty wears off, he'll go back to being exactly what he's always been. Cold, distant, unreachable." "You don't know him as well as you think you do," Emma said, surprised by her own defensiveness. She was supposed to be defending the fake version of Alexander, the man she was pretending to love. But somehow, she found herself defending the real man too, the one who'd admitted his mother called him Alex, who'd given her his grandmother's ring, who'd kissed her like she mattered. "I know him well enough to know he doesn't know how to love," Vanessa said. "Whatever you think this is, it's not what you hope it is." After Vanessa left, Emma found herself wondering if the other woman was right. Was Alexander capable of love? Or had life turned him into something too broken to truly connect with another person? "Ready to go?" Alexander appeared at her side, looking exhausted beneath his polished exterior. "More than ready," Emma admitted. The ride home was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different, charged with all the things they weren't saying about that kiss, about the way they'd looked at each other in that ballroom, about the growing sense that their careful arrangement was already becoming complicated. "You were perfect tonight," Alexander said as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse. "Everyone believed us." "You were pretty convincing yourself," Emma replied, trying to keep her tone light. "That speech it was really good." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Margaret wrote most of it, but you delivered it." "And that kiss." Emma trailed off, not sure what she wanted to say about that kiss. "That wasn't in the choreography?" Alexander admitted quietly. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "You didn't." Emma met his eyes. "It was good, convincing. That's the important thing, right?" "Right," Alexander agreed, but he didn't sound convinced. They stood in the hallway between their bedrooms, neither quite wanting to be the first to walk away. Emma could still feel the imprint of his lips on hers, the way his hands had felt in her hair. This was dangerous. She'd known this arrangement would be complicated, but she hadn't anticipated this. The way her body responded to him, the way her heart raced when he looked at her. "Good night, Emma," Alexander said finally. "Good night, Alexander." Emma closed her bedroom door and leaned against it, her hand going to her lips. She could still taste him, still feel the way he'd kissed her like she was something precious, something real. This was just business, she reminded herself. Just an arrangement. In 18 months, they'd stage their amicable separation, and she'd go back to her life with her $5 million and her funding for the community center, and Alexander would go back to his empire. But as Emma changed out of her gown and climbed into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere between the choreographed proposal and that unexpected kiss, something had shifted. Something that made the next 18 months feel infinitely more dangerous than she'd anticipated. Emma woke to find her engagement plastered across every news outlet. Her phone, which had been relatively quiet before, now buzzed constantly with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. "Social worker captures billionaire's heart," read one headline. "From community center to penthouse, the Cinderella story of Emma Hartley," proclaimed another. But it was the think pieces that made Emma's stomach churn. "Is Alexander Sterling's engagement just more PR?" questioned a prominent business blogger. "Everything we know about Emma Hartley, and what we don't," ran an investigative piece that had somehow uncovered embarrassing details from Emma's college years, including a particularly unflattering photo from a Halloween party. Emma sat at Alexander's kitchen island, a massive marble slab that probably cost more than her college tuition, scrolling through article after article, feeling increasingly nauseated. "You should eat something." Alexander appeared, already dressed in running gear, barely sweating, despite what must have been several miles. "Toast, at least." "I'm not hungry." Emma held up her phone. "Have you seen these? Margaret sent me the media roundup at 5 this morning." Alexander moved to the coffee maker, which looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. "It's mostly positive. The negative pieces were expected. There will always be skeptics." "They've published details about my student loans," Emma said, hearing the shake in her own voice. "Someone found pictures of me from when I was 20 and drunk at a party. They're questioning whether I'm only with you for your money." "Which, ironically, is partially true," Alexander said, then winced when Emma glared at him. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, I know what you meant." Emma set down her phone with more force than necessary. "But it doesn't make reading this easier. These people don't know me, Alexander. They don't know anything about my life or why I'm doing this." Alexander set a cup of coffee in front of her, perfectly prepared with cream and sugar, which meant he'd been paying attention to how she took it. "For what it's worth, the board is thrilled. I had 3 calls this morning from investors who think this engagement shows I'm finally becoming stable and mature. Your charity work, your education, your background, it's all playing exactly how we need it to." "How wonderful," Emma said flatly. "I'm so glad my life makes good PR." She saw something flicker across Alexander's face, concern maybe, or guilt, before his mask slid back into place. "I know this is difficult, but Emma, you agreed to this. You knew there would be media scrutiny. Knowing it and experiencing it are 2 very different things." Emma shot back. She stood, suddenly needing distance from him, from this gleaming kitchen, from the constant reminders that this entire life was a lie. "I'm going to shower." "Emma, don't." She held up a hand. "Just don't." Under the scalding water of her new shower, Emma let herself cry for the first time since agreeing to this arrangement. She cried for her privacy, for her integrity, for the simple life she'd had before where at least the struggles had been honest. She cried because she could still feel Alexander's kiss from last night, could still remember the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, even though none of it was real. By the time she emerged, dressed and composed, Alexander was gone. A note on the kitchen island read, "Meeting with the board. Margaret will be by at 2 p.m. to brief you on next week's events. Help yourself to anything in the apartment." Emma wandered through the penthouse, trying to get a sense of the man she'd agreed to pretend to marry. The living room was immaculate but impersonal, like a hotel suite no one actually lived in. The art on the walls was expensive but cold, abstract pieces that probably cost millions but conveyed no emotion, no personality. She found herself drawn to Alexander's office, hesitating at the doorway before stepping inside. Unlike the rest of the apartment, this room showed signs of actual use. Papers covered the desk, 3 computer monitors displayed what looked like market data and project timelines, and the walls held photographs, the first personal items Emma had seen anywhere in the penthouse. The photos showed a younger Alexander at various company milestones, breaking ground on Sterling Innovations headquarters, accepting an award from some prestigious tech organization, standing with what must have been early employees. But what caught Emma's attention was a smaller frame tucked away on a corner shelf, a family photo, faded with age. A younger Alexander, maybe 16, stood between 2 people who must have been his parents. His father was tall and stern-looking, his expression more critical than proud. But his mother was smiling, warm, her hand on young Alexander's shoulder in a gesture of clear affection. Alexander himself looked caught between them, trying to match his father's serious demeanor, but with his mother's smile playing at his lips. That was taken 3 months before she left. Emma startled, spinning to find Alexander in the doorway. He'd changed from his running gear into a suit, and his expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed him, showing a vulnerability that made Emma's heart ache. "I'm sorry," Emma said quickly. "I shouldn't have been in here. I was just trying to understand who you're engaged to," Alexander finished. He moved into the room, stopping beside her to look at the photograph. "It's fine. I don't have secrets, Emma. Just private pain, and that's different." He was quiet for a long moment, and Emma waited, sensing he needed to say something but didn't quite know how. "My mother, Catherine, was an artist," Alexander finally said. "Painter." She met my father at a gallery opening. He was already successful, already building the company. She was this vibrant, creative woman who saw beauty everywhere. They were completely wrong for each other. "What happened?" Emma asked softly. "My father wanted her to be something she wasn't. The perfect corporate wife, polished and proper, attending the right events and saying the right things. She tried for years, she tried. But it was killing her, slowly suffocating everything that made her who she was." Alexander's jaw tightened. I watched it happen. Watched her smile less, paint less, become this ghost of herself. Emma's hand found his without her consciously deciding to reach for him. Alexander's fingers closed around hers, holding tight. When I was 16, she told me she was leaving. Not leaving me, she was very clear about that. But she couldn't stay married to my father anymore, couldn't keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. She asked me to come with her. Alexander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I said no. I was angry. I thought she was being selfish, abandoning us. My father needed me, the company needed me, so I stayed. Alexander? Emma's throat tightened with emotion. She moved to Paris, opened a small gallery, started painting again. She sends letters every month, has for 18 years. I've never responded. He finally looked away from the photograph to meet Emma's eyes. By the time I realized I'd made the wrong choice, too many years had passed. How do you tell someone you're sorry for 18 years of silence? Emma understood then, with sudden clarity, why Alexander had built such walls around himself. He'd chosen duty over love, obligation over connection, and had spent nearly 2 decades convinced that emotions were liabilities, that opening your heart only gave people the power to leave. It's never too late, Emma said gently. To reach out, to apologize, to try to repair what was broken. She's still sending letters, Alexander. That means she's still hoping. Maybe. Alexander released her hand, stepping back and rebuilding his walls in real time. Emma could see it happening, watch him retreat into the cold, distant persona the world knew. But that's not why I told you this. I wanted you to understand that I know what it's like to pretend to be someone you're not. My mother did it for years and it destroyed her. I won't let that happen to you. What do you mean? This arrangement, it's asking you to lie about who you are, about what matters to you. The media scrutiny, the constant performance, pretending to be in love with someone you barely know. If it becomes too much, if you need out, I'll make sure you still get the funding for your community center and your sister's medical care. The contract doesn't have to bind you if it's hurting you. Emma stared at him, shocked. You'd do that? Give up the whole arrangement? I'd find another way to fix my reputation, Alexander said, though his expression suggested he had no idea what that other way might be. I won't watch another person I care about suffocate themselves for an obligation to me. Another person I care about. The words hung in the air between them, unexamined but impossible to ignore. I'm not your mother, Emma said finally. And you're not your father. This is different, Alexander. I went into this arrangement with my eyes open, knowing exactly what I was agreeing to. You don't need to protect me from my own choices, don't I? Alexander's eyes searched hers. Emma, last night, that kiss was convincing, Emma interrupted, not ready to examine what that kiss had meant, what it might mean. That's all it needs to be. Convincing. The doorbell rang, saving them both from continuing a conversation neither seemed prepared to have. Margaret arrived with an assistant, carrying what looked like enough documentation to fill a small library. "Morning, you two." Margaret breezed into the apartment with the energy of someone who'd already had 3 cups of coffee. "We need to discuss next week's schedule. Emma, you have a brunch with the Sterling Foundation board members' wives on Tuesday, a photo shoot for Vogue on Wednesday, and Alexander, you both need to attend the Tech Innovation Summit on Friday. There will be a couples interview with Fortune magazine, and we need to prepare talking points." As Margaret launched into logistics, Emma caught Alexander's eye across the room. He gave her a small nod, almost imperceptible, but she understood its meaning. "We're okay. We can do this." The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of preparations. Emma practiced her smile in the mirror, rehearsed her responses to likely questions, and tried to memorize details about Alexander's life that a real fiancé would know. His favorite foods, Thai, apparently, his college major, computer science with a minor in philosophy, the scar on his left hand, childhood accident involving a telescope and a misguided attempt to see the moon closer. On Monday morning, Emma woke to find Alexander already in the kitchen, making breakfast. This time he was making enough for 2. "I thought we could eat together," he said without preamble. "If we're going to convince people we're in love, we should probably be able to have a conversation over breakfast." Emma slid onto a bar stool. "What would you like to talk about?" "Tell me about your community center," Alexander said, plating scrambled eggs that looked professionally made. "Not the rehearsed story for media, but the real one. Why does it matter to you so much?" So Emma told him. She told him about growing up in the Bronx, about seeing kids just like her fall through the cracks of a system that didn't care enough to catch them. She told him about her parents, about the accident that killed them, about becoming a guardian to 13-year-old Lily while barely being an adult herself. "The center isn't just a building," Emma explained, accepting the plate Alexander offered. "It's proof that someone cares, that these kids aren't forgotten. It's the place I needed when I was younger but didn't have. Every kid who walks through those doors deserves to know they matter, that someone believes in them." Alexander listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just collecting information for their cover story. When Emma talked about Thomas and the other volunteers, about Marcus and his fraction homework, about the teenager who'd just been accepted to college despite everyone telling her she'd never make it, Alexander's expression softened in a way Emma hadn't seen before. "You really love them," he said finally. "These kids, they're your family." "They are," Emma agreed. "Just like your company is yours. I've read about you, you know. Not just the gossip, but the real articles. You've revolutionized sustainable energy, made real advances in fighting climate change. That matters, Alexander. That's not just about money or reputation. That's about leaving the world better than you found it." "Sometimes I forget that," Alexander admitted. "When you're in the middle of board meetings and investor calls and media crises, it's easy to lose sight of why you started in the first place." "Then maybe this arrangement isn't just good for your reputation," Emma said. "Maybe it's a chance to remember what matters." "And what about you?" Alexander asked. "What do you get out of this besides funding?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I don't know yet, but maybe it's okay to do something for myself, even if the primary reason is helping others. Maybe accepting help isn't the same as being selfish." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and as Emma helped clear the dishes, she realized something had shifted between them. They were still strangers in many ways, still learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. But there was a growing ease to their interactions, a sense that maybe they could actually become friends over the next 18 months. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because friendship with Alexander Sterling felt dangerous in ways Emma couldn't quite articulate. Every conversation revealed something new, something that made him more human and less the distant billionaire she'd expected. Every small kindness, the coffee prepared just right, the breakfast made for 2, the offer to release her from their arrangement if it became too much, chipped away at her defenses. Emma had agreed to fake a relationship with a man she didn't know. She hadn't anticipated that she might actually start to care about him, and caring about Alexander Sterling, she was beginning to realize, was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. The brunch with the Sterling Foundation board members' wives, was held at a restaurant in the Upper East Side that probably required reservations 6 months in advance and had a dress code stricter than most workplaces. Emma had spent an hour that morning picking out the right outfit, something that said, "I belong here," without screaming, "I'm trying too hard," settling, finally on a cream-colored dress that Simone had promised was appropriate for daytime society events. Margaret accompanied her, providing last-minute coaching in the car. These women are professional philanthropists. They've been in high society for decades. They're going to test you. Try to figure out if you're real or if you're just another woman trying to climb the social ladder using Alexander as a stepping stone. That's basically what I am doing, Emma pointed out. Yes, but they don't need to know that, Margaret said crisply. Remember, you're in love with Alexander for who he is, not what he has. You're passionate about the Foundation's work because you genuinely care about making a difference, not because it's good PR. Can you sell that? I guess we're about to find out, Emma said as the car pulled up to the restaurant. 6 women waited at a private table on the terrace, all of them immaculately dressed, perfectly coiffed, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money or status. They introduced themselves in a blur of names Emma knew she'd never remember. Patricia, Diane, Susan, Caroline, and 2 others whose names disappeared from her memory the moment they were spoken. Emma, how lovely to finally meet you. The woman who seemed to be the group's leader, Patricia, Emma thought, air-kissed both her cheeks. We've heard so much about you. Alexander has been quite secretive about your relationship. He values privacy, Emma said, taking her seat and accepting a menu she was afraid to look at. We both do. How refreshing, another woman said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. In this age of social media, privacy is such a rare commodity. Tell us, how did someone like you capture the attention of someone like Alexander Sterling? Someone like you? The condescension was barely veiled. Emma felt her spine straighten, her defenses rising. I didn't set out to capture anyone's attention, Emma said evenly. I was doing my job, advocating for the communities I serve. Alexander happened to be there and we started talking. It turns out we have more in common than you might think. Really? Like what? This from a younger woman who looked like she'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. I mean, no offense, but you're a social worker from the Bronx and he's Alexander Sterling. We both care about making real change instead of just writing checks and feeling good about ourselves, Emma said, her temper getting the better of her judgment. We both understand what it's like to fight for something, to work for something, rather than having everything handed to us. The table went silent. Emma realized she'd just insulted every woman there, most of whom had probably never worked a day in their lives. Margaret's expression suggested Emma had just committed social suicide. Then Patricia laughed. Oh, I like her. Alexander has finally found someone with a backbone. Good for him. The tension broke, and suddenly the women were peppering Emma with questions. Real questions, not just thinly veiled challenges. They wanted to know about her work, about the community center, about her plans for the Sterling Foundation's youth initiatives. Emma found herself relaxing, actually enjoying the conversation once they moved past the initial testing phase. You know, Alexander's mother, Catherine, was like you, Patricia said as they waited for dessert. She never quite fit in with our crowd either. She was too genuine, too passionate about things that mattered. We all rather liked her, even though she made us uncomfortable sometimes by asking questions we didn't want to answer. Emma's ears perked up at this mention of Alexander's mother. You knew her? Oh yes, we all did. Lovely woman. Talented artist. It was such a shame when she left, though honestly, most of us understood why. Edward Sterling was... Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. He was a difficult man, brilliant businessman, but not a warm person. He wanted a wife who would look good at events and never challenge him. Catherine was never going to be that woman. Do you still talk to her? Emma asked. Patricia smiled sadly. I send her a Christmas card every year, and she sends one back with a little watercolor she's painted. But that's all. Edward made it clear that anyone who maintained a relationship with Catherine was betraying him. Most of us chose to stay in his good graces. I'm not proud of it, but that's how these things work in our world. Emma thought about Alexander, about the photograph in his office, about 18 years of unopened letters. That must have been hard for Alexander, losing his mother like that. It destroyed something in him, Patricia said bluntly. Before Catherine left, Alexander was different, warmer, more open. After she left, he became more like his father, cold, driven, emotionally unavailable. We all hoped he'd eventually heal, find someone who could reach him. Vanessa certainly tried, but she shook her head. Vanessa wanted the image of Alexander Sterling, not the real person. You, though, you seem different. I am different, Emma said, and realized it was true. She wasn't doing this for Alexander's money or status, not really. Yes, she needed the financial security, but what she really wanted was to protect the people she loved, to keep the community center alive, to make a real difference. In that way, she and Alexander were more alike than anyone at this table realized. When Emma finally escaped the brunch 3 hours later, she felt emotionally exhausted. Margaret had deemed the event a success. You won them over, especially Patricia, and she's the most influential of the group, but Emma just wanted to go home and hide in her room. Except home was Alexander's penthouse, and when she arrived, she found him in the living room with 3 people she didn't recognize, all of them gesturing animatedly at what appeared to be architectural drawings spread across the coffee table. Emma! Alexander looked up, his expression brightening in a way that made Emma's heart skip. You're back. How was the brunch? Terrifying and exhausting, Emma admitted, then noticed his guests. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Alexander assured her, standing and extending a hand toward her in a gesture that felt natural, almost unconscious. Come here, I want to show you something. Emma crossed to him, acutely aware of the 3 strangers watching their interaction. Alexander's hand found the small of her back. That possessive gesture from the gala that she was learning was his default way of keeping her close. This is Sarah Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, and Jennifer Wu, Alexander introduced. They're architects. I've asked them to design a new community center for the Bronx. Emma stared at him. What? Your current center, the building, it's barely holding together, right? You mentioned the roof leaks and the heating is unreliable, and you're constantly worried about code violations. Alexander gestured to the drawings. I thought, why just fund the existing center when we could build something better? Something designed specifically for what you need. A space that could serve more kids, with proper facilities, real technology. Everything you've probably dreamed of, but never had the resources to create. Emma looked at the drawings, seeing a building that was everything the current center wasn't. Modern, spacious, bright. There were designated areas for homework help, art programs, computer labs, a real gymnasium, even a small theater. It was perfect. It was too much. Alexander, I can't. This must cost. Let me worry about the cost, Alexander interrupted. The Sterling Foundation can fund this. It's exactly the kind of project we should be supporting. Plus, it's good PR for us, shows we're committed to real change, not just writing checks. There it was, the reminder that everything between them was ultimately about his image. But Emma couldn't quite make herself feel cynical about it, not when she was looking at a building that could change hundreds of lives. Can we really do this? She asked, her voice smaller than she intended. We're doing it, Alexander said firmly. Construction can start in 6 weeks if we push the permits through. You'll be involved in every decision. What programs to include, how to design the spaces, all of it. This is your center, Emma. I'm just providing the resources. Emma felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She couldn't cry in front of strangers, couldn't show how much this meant. But Alexander saw anyway. He always seemed to see more than she wanted him to, and his hand on her back moved in a small, soothing circle. Why don't you show Emma what you've planned for the art room? Alexander suggested to the architects. It's based on some ideas her volunteer coordinator had. For the next 2 hours, Emma pored over the designs with the architects, suggesting modifications, explaining what would work best for the kids they served. Alexander sat nearby, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just watching Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. When the architects finally left, promising revised drawings by next week, Emma found herself alone with Alexander in the vast living room. "You talked to Thomas," she said, "about his ideas for the center." "I did," Alexander confirmed. "I called him yesterday, introduced myself as your fiancé, asked what he thought the center needed most. He was suspicious at first. Apparently, he's very protective of you. But once he started talking about the kids and the programs, he couldn't stop." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this? The new building, I mean. It's so far beyond what the contract required." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "When you talked about the center at breakfast, about those kids and what they mean to you, I remembered why I started my company in the first place. Not for money or success, but because I wanted to solve problems, to make things better. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. But watching you talk about your work, seeing how much you care..." He paused, then met her eyes. "I want to help you do what you love, Emma. Is that so hard to believe?" "Yes," Emma said honestly. "You're a businessman, Alexander. This is a transaction for you. That's fine, that's what we agreed to, but don't pretend it's something else." "What if it's becoming something else?" Alexander asked quietly. "What if I'm starting to think this arrangement was the best decision I've ever made, and not for the reasons I expected?" Emma's heart raced. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that could unravel everything. "Alexander, I'm not saying I'm falling in love with you," he interrupted, though his expression suggested he might be lying. "I'm just saying, maybe we could be friends. Real friends, not just business partners pretending for the cameras." Friends. Emma wanted to laugh at how inadequate the word felt for what was developing between them. But friends was safer than whatever else might be growing in the spaces between their scripted interactions. "Friends?" Emma agreed, extending her hand with mock formality. Alexander took it, but instead of shaking, he pulled her closer, until they were standing face to face, close enough that Emma could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Friends who are engaged," he clarified, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Friends who have to convince the world they're madly in love." "That's very complicated friendship," Emma managed, her voice embarrassingly breathless. "I'm a complicated person," Alexander said with a small smile. "I thought you'd figured that out by now." Before Emma could respond, his phone rang. Alexander sighed, releasing her hand to answer it. As he talked to whoever was on the other end, something about the board meeting and quarterly earnings, Emma retreated to her room, needing space to process everything that had just happened. The new community center. Alexander talking to Thomas. The way he'd looked at her when he said this arrangement was becoming something else. The warmth of his hand holding hers. The gentleness in his voice when he asked if they could be friends. Emma sat on her bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos from the gala. There was one that had made it into multiple publications. The moment right after Alexander proposed, when he'd stood and cupped her face, right before that devastating kiss. The photographer had captured something Emma hadn't realized was there. The way they were looking at each other, like nothing else in the world existed, like they'd forgotten it was all pretend. She needed to be more careful. She needed to remember this was temporary, that in 18 months she'd walk away with her money and her community center, and Alexander would go back to his empire and his cold, distant life. But as Emma lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling of her too-perfect bedroom in her fake fiancé's penthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that when those 18 months were over, walking away from Alexander Sterling was going to hurt in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Tech Innovation Summit was one of those industry events where billion-dollar deals were made over cocktails, and the future of technology was shaped by men in expensive suits. Emma had attended fundraisers before, had rubbed shoulders with wealthy donors. But this was different. This wasn't about charity or goodwill, this was pure business, pure power, and she felt completely out of her depth. "Stay close to me," Alexander murmured, as they entered the convention center ballroom. His hand rested on her lower back, that now familiar touch that always seemed to steady her. Some of these people can be intense. That turned out to be an understatement. Within minutes of arriving, they were swarmed by tech executives, venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, all of them wanting to congratulate Alexander on his engagement while simultaneously pitching their latest projects or trying to get his commitment to invest in their startups. Emma played her role, smiling, asking polite questions, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny. She was getting better at this, she realized. The performance didn't feel quite so exhausting anymore. Sometimes, when Alexander would catch her eye across a conversation or reach for her hand, it almost felt real. "Alexander Sterling!" A voice boomed across the room. Emma turned to see a man in his 50s approaching, all broad shoulders and 2 white teeth. And this must be the famous Emma Hartley. "I'm Richard Blackwood. No relation to Richard Blackwood, your media consultant." He laughed at his own joke. Actually, this was James Colton, one of Sterling Innovation's major investors, and, according to Margaret's briefing, one of the board members most concerned about Alexander's reputation. "Mr. Colton," Alexander said, his hand tightening slightly on Emma's back. "Good to see you." "Is it, though?" Colton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd show your face after all that nasty business with Vanessa's interview. Though I suppose this engagement is meant to address that, isn't it?" The comment was just shy of insulting, implying that Emma was little more than a reputation management tool. Which, to be fair, was partially true, but Emma still felt her spine stiffen. "Actually, I proposed to Emma because I love her," Alexander said, his voice calm but with an edge Emma had learned to recognize. "The timing may have been fortunate from a PR perspective, but that's not why we're together." Of course, Colton said, though. His expression suggested he believed nothing of the sort. Still, it's quite the coincidence, isn't it? 6 months of dating, perfectly hidden from the media, announced right when the board was getting concerned. Almost too perfect, one might say. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Colton?" Emma asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Nothing, my dear, nothing at all." Colton's smile widened. "I just find it interesting that Alexander here, who hasn't been able to maintain a relationship for more than a few months, has suddenly found true love with a woman who happens to need significant financial resources for her charitable work." "Convenient for both of you, really." The words hung in the air like poison. Several nearby conversations had stopped, people turning to watch this confrontation with barely disguised interest. Emma could feel her face heating, could see the calculations in Colton's eyes. He was testing them, trying to see if they'd crack under pressure. Alexander's jaw tightened, and Emma recognized the signs of him about to say something devastating that would probably make things worse. So she did something she'd been specifically instructed not to do. She went off script. "You're right," Emma said, drawing startled looks from both Alexander and Colton. "It is convenient. Alexander gets to improve his reputation, and I get to secure funding for my community center. That's what you're suggesting, isn't it? That this whole thing is transactional." "Emma," Alexander started, but she cut him off. "What James here doesn't understand," Emma continued, using Colton's first name with deliberate familiarity, "is that the best relationships are somewhat transactional. My parents, before they died, had a marriage based on what they gave each other. My mother gave my father stability and love. My father gave my mother adventure and passion. They traded these things freely, gladly, because that's what love is. It's choosing to meet each other's needs, to support each other's dreams, to be what the other person needs most." Emma turned to Alexander, taking his hand. "Does Alexander give me access to resources I wouldn't have otherwise?" "Yes." "Do I give him something he was lacking? Someone who sees him as more than just his wealth? Someone who challenges him to remember why his work matters?" "I'd like to think so. If that's transactional, then I hope every relationship in the world is transactional, because it sounds a lot like partnership to me." She looked back at Colton, whose smug expression had faltered. "So yes, Mr. Colton, our engagement is convenient. It's also real. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, no matter what your cynical view of the world might tell you." There was a moment of absolute silence. Then someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that quickly spread through the crowd. Colton's face reddened. "Well," he said stiffly, "you're certainly more articulate than I expected. Alexander, you'll have my vote at the board meeting next week." He stalked off without another word. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She'd just publicly defended their fake relationship by calling it real, while also acknowledging it was transactional. Had she just destroyed everything? Made it worse? "That," Alexander said quietly, "was the single most impressive thing I've ever witnessed." Emma looked up at him, surprised. "You're not angry?" I went completely off script. "Margaret is probably having a heart attack right now." "Margaret is smart enough to recognize genius when she sees it." Alexander's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Emma, you just defended me, defended us, in a way that was both completely honest and totally convincing. You made Colton look like a cynical fool while positioning our relationship as something healthy and real." "How did you do that?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "He made me angry, and I just reacted." "React like that more often," Alexander said, then kissed her forehead in a gesture so tender it made Emma's eyes sting with sudden tears. The rest of the summit passed in a blur. Emma found herself surrounded by people who wanted to talk to her, to hear more about her work, to congratulate her on putting James Colton in his place. Several wives of tech executives asked about the community center, saying they'd like to get involved. 2 venture capitalists offered to fund similar programs in other cities. By the time they left, Emma's feet hurt from her heels, her face ached from smiling, and she was emotionally exhausted. In the car ride home, she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. "You okay?" Alexander asked. "I'm not sure," Emma said honestly. "That was a lot." "You were incredible." There was something in Alexander's voice that made Emma open her eyes. He was watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "The way you stood up to Colton, the way you defended us." "Emma, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Emma said. "He was insulting you. Insulting both of us. I couldn't just stand there and take it." "Most people would have," Alexander said quietly. "Vanessa certainly would have. She always cared more about what people thought than about defending me to them." "I'm not Vanessa," Emma said. "No," Alexander agreed. "You're nothing like her. You're extraordinary, Emma." The words hung between them, weighted with something that felt dangerous. Emma knew she should deflect, make a joke, remind him this was all pretend. Instead, she found herself asking, "What did you mean earlier, when you said this arrangement was becoming something else?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I meant that somewhere between the fake engagement and the choreographed romance, I started actually enjoying spending time with you. I look forward to breakfast together. I like hearing about your day. When Colton was attacking you tonight, I didn't feel upset because it was bad for our arrangement. I felt upset because someone was hurting you, and that bothered me more than I expected." "Alexander." Emma's heart raced. "I'm not saying I'm in love with you," Alexander continued, echoing his words from earlier in the week. "I don't even know if I'm capable of love, honestly. But I like you, Emma. I respect you. And I'm starting to think that even after this arrangement ends, I'm going to miss having you in my life." Emma didn't know what to say. She'd spent the past 2 weeks telling herself this was just business, that the growing ease between them was just them becoming better at their roles. But Alexander was right, something had shifted. She looked forward to seeing him too. She liked their morning conversations, the way he asked about her work with genuine interest, the way he'd built her a new community center without being asked. "We have 16 more months," Emma said finally. "Let's not complicate things by overthinking it." It was a coward's response, and they both knew it. But Alexander nodded anyway, and they spent the rest of the ride in silence, both of them lost in thoughts they weren't ready to voice. Back at the penthouse, Emma changed into comfortable clothes and wandered into the kitchen for water, only to find Alexander already there, still in his suit pants but having shed his jacket and tie. He looked tired, the careful control he usually maintained slightly loosened. "Want some tea?" he offered. "I can't sleep yet. Too wired from the summit." "Sure," Emma said, sliding onto a bar stool. They waited for the water to boil in comfortable silence, then sat together drinking chamomile tea like it was the most normal thing in the world. 2 people sharing a quiet moment at the end of a long day. Not a billionaire and his contract fiancée. Not a carefully orchestrated arrangement, just them. "Tell me something real," Alexander said suddenly. "Something you've never told anyone." Emma considered whether to deflect, decided against it. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "of all of this. Of lying to everyone I care about. Of what happens when this ends and I have to go back to my regular life. Except now I'll know what it's like to live like this, to be with someone like you. And my regular life is going to feel so small and empty by comparison. Alexander's eyes held hers. It won't be empty. You'll have your center, your kids, Lily will be healthy. You'll have made a real difference. I know, Emma said. But I'll also have spent 18 months pretending to be in love with you. How do I just turn that off? How do I go back to being Emma Hartley, community center director, after being Emma Sterling, Billionaire's wife? First of all, it's Emma Hartley Sterling, Alexander corrected with a small smile. You're keeping your name, remember? We decided that was important for your feminist credentials. Emma couldn't help but laugh. Yes, because nothing says genuine feminism like a fake marriage for money. Now it's my turn, Alexander said. Something I've never told anyone. I'm afraid too. Not of the arrangement ending, but of... He hesitated, then pushed forward. Of it being real. Of actually caring about you and having you leave anyway, just like my mother did. Everyone leaves, Emma. Eventually, everyone I care about leaves. At least with this arrangement, I know when it's coming. At least I can prepare. The vulnerability in his confession broke something open in Emma's chest. She reached across the counter and took his hand. I won't leave before the 18 months are up. I promise. Whatever happens, however complicated this gets, I'll honor our agreement. That's not what I'm afraid of, Alexander said quietly. I'm afraid that when the 18 months are up, I won't want you to leave. And then what do I do? How do I ask you to stay when you've made it clear this has an expiration date? They stared at each other across the kitchen. Counter. Both of them suddenly aware they were having a conversation that could change everything. Emma should pull back. Remind him this was just an arrangement. Maintain the boundaries they'd established. Instead, she found herself saying, We have 16 months to figure that out. Maybe by then we'll know what we actually want. Maybe, Alexander agreed, but he didn't sound convinced. That night, Emma lay in bed replaying their conversation, Alexander's admission, her own confession of fear. This was spiraling out of control, becoming something neither of them had anticipated. She'd signed up to fake a relationship, not to develop actual feelings for Alexander Sterling. Except she was developing feelings. She liked him. She cared about him. When Colton had attacked their relationship, Emma hadn't been defending the arrangement. She'd been defending Alexander, protecting him from someone trying to diminish what they were building together. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alexander, whose bedroom was just down the hall. Still awake? Emma typed back, Yes, can't sleep. Me neither. Thank you for tonight. For defending us. It meant more than you know. Emma stared at the message, then typed, You're welcome. You'd do the same for me. I would. In a heartbeat. Emma set down her phone and closed her eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. Because somewhere between the fake engagement and the real conversations, between the choreographed romance and the genuine moments, Emma Hartley was falling for Alexander Sterling. And that was the most dangerous thing that could possibly happen.